She always had a way of disappearing, but 8 years ago, when Rachel walked out the door, I thought that was it. Gone. Vanished. I mourned her like she was dead. And then, last week, she appeared on my Instagram feed. It wasn't even my account. My cousin, Tim, had tagged me in a post about some yacht party in Miami. The photo wasn't even interesting, a bunch of rich Americans sipping champagne. But there, in the background, stood Rachel. My Rachel. Or at least the woman who was supposed to be my wife. She had the same honey blonde hair, the same sharp cheekbones, and that smug little smile she used to flash when she thought she'd gotten away with something. 8 years, and she looked the same. It was chilling. I stared at that photo for hours, zooming in and out, convincing myself it was her. My head screamed it couldn't be, but my gut knew. I saved the photo, my hands shaking. That night, I didn't sleep. It wasn't just the shock of seeing her, it was the 1,000 questions racing through my mind. Where had she been? Why hadn't she contacted me? And what the hell was she doing on some random boat in Miami? I had to find out. Once I convinced myself it really was Rachel, I knew I couldn't sit still. My first instinct was to call her out publicly, but something stopped me. What if she denied it? What if she lied, again? No, I needed to see her in person. I needed answers, face to face. I called Tim, trying to sound casual. Hey, about that yacht party pic you posted, how do you even know those people? Oh, that? My girlfriend's boss threw the party. Why? I swallowed hard. One of the women in the background looked familiar. Think you could get me some names? Tim laughed. Dude, it's Miami. Half those people probably don't even use real names. Why, you stalking someone? Just curious, I said, brushing him off, but inside, my blood was boiling. Tim didn't think much of it and sent me a blurry guest list his girlfriend had taken for some reason. Rachel wasn't listed, of course. But a man named Ethan Greenfield was, and I recognized him immediately. He'd been in the photo, standing too close to Rachel for my liking. It took one quick Google search to find Ethan. Tech billionaire, lives in Miami, notorious playboy. Jackpot. If Rachel was in his circle, I'd find her. Booking a flight to Miami was the easiest part. Explaining my sudden trip to my business partners in Madrid? Not so easy. I threw together some excuse about scouting property opportunities, but in reality, I wasn't thinking about investments. I spent the entire flight rehearsing what I'd say to Rachel. Would I go in guns blazing? Or play it cool and catch her off guard? By the time the plane landed, I still didn't have a plan. All I knew was that I wasn't leaving Miami without talking to her. The only question left was, what would I even find? I tracked Ethan down to some rooftop bar that looked like a scene straight out of a Netflix drama, glass walls, neon lights, the kind of place where people order $500 cocktails because they can. I bribed my way past the doorman, the perks of being loaded, and started scanning the crowd. And then I saw her. Rachel. Sitting at the bar, laughing with Ethan, her hand resting on his arm. She was wearing a dress so tight it looked painted on, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. She wasn't just alive, she was thriving. I couldn't decide whether to storm up and demand answers or stay back and watch. My indecision didn't last long. Rachel turned her head and locked eyes with me. Her laughter died instantly. For a split second, she looked terrified. Then, just as quickly, she covered it up with that signature smirk. The one she used to flash right before saying something completely outlandish. Well, she said, sliding off her stool. Look who decided to cross the Atlantic. How's Spain, honey? Honey. She said it like we were still married, like she hadn't disappeared without a trace 8 years ago. Ethan looked between us, clearly confused. You two know each other? Rachel waved him off like he was a stray dog. Oh, Ethan, this is Mateo. My husband. The word hit me like a slap. Husband. Now she wanted to acknowledge me. Before I could respond, Ethan raised an eyebrow. You're married? Since when? Rachel shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. Since forever. But don't worry, it's not serious. Not serious. I felt my blood boil. My hands clenched at my sides as I forced out, 8 years, Rachel. You've been gone for 8 years. And this is how I find you. Here, playing arm candy to a billionaire. Her expression shifted, cool, detached, like I was the one being unreasonable. Don't be so dramatic, Matteo. Let's not make a scene, okay? A scene? That's exactly what I was about to make. Not make a scene. I barked, my voice sharp enough to turn heads nearby. Rachel, you disappeared without a trace. No goodbye, no explanation. Just gone. And now you're telling me to calm down. Rachel rolled her eyes like I was being an inconvenience. Matteo, lower your voice. People are staring. Let them stare. I snapped. Maybe one of them knows what you've been doing for the past 8 years since you clearly couldn't bother to tell me. Ethan, still sitting at the bar, muttered, "This is awkward," and slid off his stool. "I'll give you two a moment." He walked away without looking back, leaving Rachel and me in a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. As soon as he was gone, Rachel sighed and crossed her arms. "Okay, fine. You want the truth?" "That would be nice for a change," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. She hesitated, then said, "I needed space, Matteo. Our marriage wasn't working. You were too controlling. Always hovering, always needing to know where I was." I blinked, stunned. Controlling? I trusted you completely, Rachel. I didn't even question it when you went on those work trips that lasted weeks. Was that you needing space too? Her lips twitched, and for the first time, she looked uncomfortable. It wasn't just that. I felt trapped, okay? I didn't want to be Matteo's wife anymore. I wanted to be me. I stared at her, my mind reeling. "So, your solution was to vanish into thin air. Do you have any idea what I went through? I thought you were dead. I spent years searching, hiring private investigators, going through hell thinking I might have done something to drive you away. And the whole time, you were, what? Partying in Miami with Ethan Greenfield." She flinched at his name, but her mask of indifference quickly returned. "It wasn't like that. Ethan and I only reconnected a few months ago." "Reconnected?" I repeated, my voice rising again. "You're seriously telling me you knew him before you disappeared?" She froze, her eyes darting to the side. And that's when I realized, she was lying. Again. "Rachel," I said, stepping closer, my tone deadly calm. "How long have you known Ethan?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time, she didn't have a snarky comeback. "Answer me," I demanded. Finally, she muttered, "Since before we got married." My stomach dropped. "What are you saying?" She let out a long, exasperated sigh. "I met Ethan before you, okay? We dated for a while, but it didn't work out. When I left, he helped me." "Helped you?" I repeated, barely able to keep my voice steady. "You mean he funded your little disappearing act?" Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. I felt the world tilt under me. "So, let me get this straight," I said, barely holding back my rage. "You didn't just leave me, you planned this. You had Ethan waiting in the wings like some backup plan while I spent years tearing myself apart looking for you." Rachel shifted on her heels, her confidence faltering for the first time. "It wasn't like that, Matteo. I didn't plan to disappear, it just happened. It just happened." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that even startled me. "Rachel, disappearing isn't something that just happens. What, did you accidentally book a one-way ticket to Miami and lose your phone for 8 years? Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand. You were suffocating me. I couldn't breathe in that marriage. Ethan gave me a way out, a chance to start over." "A chance to start over?" I echoed, my voice dripping with venom. "So, while I was drowning in guilt, you were sipping champagne on yachts, living your best life?" "I wasn't living my best life," she snapped, her temper flaring. "Do you think it was easy for me? Leaving everything behind? Hiding from you, from everyone?" I took a step closer, my voice low and deadly. "Don't you dare try to play the victim here. You didn't hide. You abandoned me. You let me think you were dead. And for what? So you could be Ethan Greenfield's little pet project? Her face turned red, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she crossed her arms defensively. You're acting like you're some saint in all this, Matteo. Like you didn't play a part in pushing me away. Don't you dare, I said, pointing a finger at her. Don't you dare try to turn this on me. I wasn't perfect, Rachel, but I didn't lie. I didn't cheat. I didn't run away in the middle of the night and pretend my husband didn't exist. She opened her mouth to retort but then stopped, her eyes darting to the side. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize. Instead, she dropped the next bombshell. Ethan isn't just someone who helped me, she said, her voice soft but sharp, like a knife sliding between my ribs. We've been together. Off and on. I froze. The room seemed to close in on me, the noise of the bar fading into a dull hum. Together, I repeated numbly. You've been sleeping with him. Her silence was answer enough. I stepped back, shaking my head. Unbelievable. After everything, you didn't just leave me. You replaced me. Don't make it sound so black and white, she said, her tone defensive. Things were complicated. Complicated? I laughed bitterly. No, Rachel, this isn't complicated. It's betrayal. Plain and simple. Her face hardened. You wanted the truth, Matteo. Well, there it is. Now what? Are you going to keep yelling, or are we actually going to talk like adults? I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of fury, heartbreak, and disbelief. Part of me wanted to keep yelling, to tear her apart with words. But another part, the part that still remembered the woman I'd fallen in love with, wanted to know why. Fine, I said finally, my voice cold. Let's talk. Start with this, why come here? Why risk being seen if you were so desperate to stay hidden? Her response was another twist I didn't see coming. I wasn't planning to stay hidden anymore, she said quietly. I came back because I need something from you. Her words hung in the air, sharp and surreal. You need something from me? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You abandoned me for 8 years, and now you want a favor? What could you possibly need from me, Rachel? She hesitated, and for the first time that night, she looked genuinely uneasy. It's complicated, she said, avoiding my eyes. Stop saying that. I snapped, my patience finally snapping. Just spit it out, Rachel. After all the lies, what's one more bombshell? She glanced around, lowering her voice as if the walls might have ears. Fine. Ethan's in trouble, big trouble. And I need your help to fix it. I stared at her, utterly dumbfounded. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You want me to help the guy who funded your escape and slept with my wife? Are you out of your mind? It's not like that, she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. He's caught up in some legal mess. Fraud, tax evasion, whatever. His assets are frozen, and I'm stuck. You're stuck. I repeated, laughing bitterly. So now that the gravy train's derailed, you think I'm your safety net? It's not about money, she said, her tone sharp. I need you to talk to some of your business contacts, pull some strings. You're connected, Matteo. You could make this go away. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Let me see if I've got this right, I said, stepping closer. You want me to risk my reputation, my career, to help your lover, the guy who helped you destroy my life? And you're standing here like that's a reasonable request? It's not just about him, she snapped, her voice finally cracking. It's about me too. If this blows up, I lose everything. Everything, Matteo. Do you understand that? Good, I shot back. Maybe you should lose everything. Maybe you should know what it feels like to have your entire world ripped apart while someone else walks away without a scratch. Her face turned pale, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, she said, I didn't come to you first. That stopped me cold. What do you mean? I went to others, she admitted, her eyes fixed on the floor. Old friends, people Ethan knows. Nobody would help. They either didn't want to get involved, or they didn't have the resources. You're my last option. I couldn't help but laugh, a hollow, bitter sound. Your last option. How touching. After everything, I'm just the guy you come to when no one else will save you. Please, Matteo, she said, her voice trembling now. You don't have to do it for him. Do it for me. I stared at her, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave her to deal with the mess she'd made. But another part, the part that still felt some twisted attachment to her, hesitated. I don't owe you anything, I said finally, my voice cold. But I'll think about it. Her eyes lit up with hope, but I wasn't done. If I do this, I added, you're giving me the full truth. Every last detail about what happened 8 years ago. No more lies, Rachel. No more games. Do you understand me? She nodded slowly, but the look in her eyes told me this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Rachel agreed to meet me the next day at a quiet cafe away from the flashy Miami nightlife. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a table by the window. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her coffee cup, her usual confidence noticeably absent. I sat down across from her without a word, my eyes locked on hers. Start talking, I said. She took a deep breath and began. It wasn't planned at first, she said, her voice low. I didn't wake up one day and decide to leave you. But the cracks were there, Matteo. We both know it. Don't rewrite history, I said, cutting her off. We had problems, sure, but every marriage does. That doesn't explain why you vanished. She hesitated, then finally said, Ethan reached out to me before I left. We ran into each other at a charity gala in New York while I was on one of those work trips. He offered me something I didn't think I could get with you. Freedom. Freedom. I repeated, my voice rising. From what? A husband who loved you. A life you didn't have to work a day for. Her expression hardened. From being the perfect wife, Matteo. From living under your shadow. You didn't see it, but I was suffocating. Ethan told me I could be my own person, start over without the pressure. And yes, I took him up on it. So you just left, I said, my voice shaking. Without a word. You didn't even give me a chance to fix things. I didn't think you'd let me go, she admitted. You were always so persistent. I thought it would be easier this way. Easier for you, I shot back. You didn't care what it did to me. She flinched, but I pressed on. What about the lies? The investigators, the false leads, the cryptic emails I thought might be from you? Was that all you too? She shook her head. That wasn't me. Ethan handled everything. He said it would keep you off my trail. Of course he did, I muttered, my anger simmering. And what about now? What's your excuse for showing up in public, knowing I'd find you eventually? Her face turned pale, and she looked down at her hands. Ethan's in over his head, she said quietly. He needs someone powerful to pull him out, and I thought, maybe you could help. For old time's sake. For old time's sake. I leaned back, laughing bitterly. Rachel, do you even hear yourself? You destroyed me, and now you're asking for a favor like we're old friends. I'm desperate, Matteo, she said, her voice trembling. I know I don't deserve your help, but I didn't know where else to turn. For a moment, I said nothing, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to walk away and leave her to clean up her own mess. But another part, the part that still hadn't let go of the life we once had, needed closure. I'll help, I said finally, my voice cold. But not for you. For me. Because I need to know the whole truth. Every detail, Rachel. You owe me that much. Her shoulders sagged with relief, but her eyes held a flicker of something else, fear. Fine, she said. I'll tell you everything. But you might not like what you hear. Rachel sat there, stirring her coffee as if she were deciding which parts of the truth she could afford to reveal. I leaned forward, my voice cold and clipped. No more games, Rachel. Start talking. The whole truth, or the deal's off. She sighed, looking out the window before finally meeting my gaze. Okay. You want the truth? Here it is. She started from the beginning, recounting how she'd run into Ethan at that gala in New York. It wasn't just a chance encounter, she admitted, he'd sought her out, claiming he'd been watching her from a distance for years. He said he could see I wasn't happy, she said, her voice trembling. He promised he'd give me a way out. A fresh start. Watching you for years. I said, disgusted. And you didn't think that was a red flag? Rachel shrugged, her expression defensive. At the time, it didn't feel wrong. He made me feel understood. Like he saw me in a way you never did. My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. So, what then? He convinced you to leave, and you just disappeared. It wasn't that simple, she said. At first, I told him no. I thought I could fix things with you. But every time I came back to Madrid, I felt trapped. Like I was living someone else's life. You mean the life we built together, I snapped. She flinched but kept going. Eventually, I gave in. Ethan set everything up, a private flight, a fake identity, even a cover story for why I'd disappeared. He told me it was the only way to truly start over. And you believed him? I asked, my voice dripping with disbelief. You threw away your entire life because some billionaire told you to. Her jaw tightened. You don't understand what it was like, Mateo. I was miserable. I felt like I was suffocating every single day. And what about now? I asked. Are you still miserable with him? She hesitated, and in that moment, I saw a crack in her armor. It's complicated, she said finally. Stop saying that. I barked. You've had 8 years to think about this. Was it worth it, Rachel? Was leaving me, lying to me, worth whatever you got out of it? She didn't answer right away, and when she finally did, her voice was barely above a whisper. I thought it would be. But things with Ethan, they aren't what I expected. I stared at her, my anger giving way to a bitter sense of satisfaction. Let me guess, I said. The man who helped you destroy your life turned out to have a dark side. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. What did he do, Rachel? I asked, my tone sharper now. She looked down at her hands, her voice trembling. Ethan's not who I thought he was. He's manipulative, controlling. Worse than I ever imagined. I tried to leave him a few times, but he always finds a way to pull me back. And now you want me to clean up his mess? I said, shaking my head. You've got some nerve, Rachel. I don't have a choice, she said, her voice breaking. If Ethan goes down, he'll take me with him. And I can't. I can't go through that again. I stared at her, a storm of emotions churning inside me. Part of me wanted to walk away and let her face the consequences of her choices. But another part, the part that still saw her as the woman I once loved, couldn't ignore the desperation in her voice. Fine, I said finally. I'll help you. But after this, we're done. Do you understand me? No more lies, no more favors. You're on your own. She nodded, relief washing over her face. But something told me this was far from over. As I walked away from that cafe, Rachel's pleas echoing in my ears, I realized something. I wasn't doing this to help her. I was doing it for me. For closure. For answers. And maybe, just maybe, for revenge. Ethan Greenfield wasn't just some wealthy playboy who'd meddled in my marriage, he was a man who'd orchestrated my wife's disappearance and profited from my misery. If Rachel wanted me to clean up his mess, I was going to do it my way. The first step was simple, I needed leverage. People like Ethan don't crumble under accusations or confrontations, they crumble under evidence. I made a few calls to my contacts back in Spain. It didn't take long to find someone who knew about Ethan's business dealings. Greenfield's a snake, one of my old friends said over the phone. Half his fortune is built on shady deals and offshore accounts. If you're looking to hit him where it hurts, follow the money. Follow the money. That was advice I could work with. I hired a private investigator, a real shark named Curtis who'd dealt with billionaires before. Within 2 days, Curtis had dug up enough dirt on Ethan to fill a landfill. Fraud, embezzlement, even rumors of bribery to silence former employees. But the real jackpot? A trail of offshore accounts linked to a shell company Ethan had used to hide millions. Do you want this to go public? Curtis asked. I thought about it. Exposing Ethan would be satisfying, sure, but it wouldn't solve Rachel's problem, or mine. I needed to use this information strategically. Not yet, I told him. I want to see how he reacts when he knows I've got him by the throat. That night, I called Rachel. I have what I need, I said. What do you mean? She asked, her voice wary. I've got proof that Ethan's a crook, I said. Enough to bury him if I wanted to. There was a long pause. You're not going to turn him in, are you? Not unless I have to, I said. But I need you to set up a meeting. Just the three of us. No lawyers, no bodyguards. He needs to hear this from me. She hesitated. Ethan doesn't do confrontations, Mateo. He's not the kind of guy who plays fair. Good, I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. Neither am I. Rachel reluctantly agreed to arrange the meeting. The next evening, I found myself standing outside Ethan's penthouse, my stomach churning with a mix of nerves and adrenaline. When the door opened, Ethan stood there, looking smug as ever. Mateo, he said, flashing a practiced smile. To what do I owe the pleasure? You know exactly why I'm here, I said, stepping inside. Rachel was already there, sitting on the couch with a drink in her hand. She looked pale, but she didn't say a word. I turned back to Ethan, my voice steady. You and I need to talk. Alone. Ethan glanced at Rachel, then back at me. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of her. Fine, I said, pulling out a folder and tossing it onto the table. Let's start with your offshore accounts. Ethan's smile vanished. He picked up the folder, flipping through the pages. Where did you get this? He demanded, his voice icy. Doesn't matter, I said. What matters is what I'm going to do with it. You think you can threaten me? He said, his voice rising. You have no idea who you're dealing with. And you have no idea how much I don't care, I shot back. Here's how this works, you clean up your mess, leave Rachel out of it, and disappear from her life. If you don't, I'll make sure the authorities have everything they need to bring you down. Your choice. Ethan stared at me, his jaw clenched. For the first time, he looked genuinely rattled. You're bluffing, he said finally. Try me, I said, meeting his gaze. Ethan stared at me, his jaw tight and eyes blazing with fury. You think you can waltz into my life and dictate terms? You have no idea what kind of fire you're playing with, Mateo. I leaned in, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing, Ethan. You built your empire on lies, and I've got the receipts to burn it to the ground. So unless you want to see your face plastered across every news channel in the country, you'll listen carefully. He slammed the folder onto the table and turned to Rachel, his voice dripping with venom. You brought him here. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me. Rachel flinched but held her ground. You dragged me into your mess, Ethan. I didn't ask for this. He laughed bitterly. Didn't ask for it? You've been living off my money for 8 years. And now you think you can just walk away. You're as much a part of this as I am. Rachel looked at me, panic flickering in her eyes. Mateo, this wasn't part of the plan. Stay out of this, I snapped, my patience with both of them wearing thin. I turned back to Ethan. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to cut Rachel loose. No threats, no blackmail, no strings attached. She's out of your life for good. And you're going to clean up whatever mess you've made before it explodes in your face. If you don't, I'll personally make sure you rot in a cell. Ethan's lips curled into a sneer. And what do you get out of this? A reunion with your wife. Hate to break it to you, but she's not the woman you think she is. I don't want her back, I said coldly. I want her free of you. After that, she's on her own. Rachel shot me a wounded look, but I ignored her. This wasn't about reconciliation, it was about closure. Ethan stood there, visibly seething. Finally, he said, fine. I'll let her go. But don't think for a second this is over. You've made an enemy, Mateo, and I don't lose. Neither do I said, meeting his glare. With that, I turned to Rachel. We're done here. Pack your things and get out of his orbit. I've done my part. What happens next is on you. Rachel looked like she wanted to argue, but she nodded. Thank you, Matteo, she said softly. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked out of that penthouse, leaving behind the two people who had turned my life into a nightmare. But as I stepped into the cool Miami night, a new thought began to form in my mind. Something about Ethan's reaction didn't sit right. His arrogance, his threats, they weren't just posturing. He was hiding something bigger. I wasn't done with him yet. I should have walked away. I had Rachel out of Ethan's grip, the satisfaction of seeing his smug facade crack, and enough dirt to ruin him if he pushed me. But something about that confrontation gnawed at me, a feeling I couldn't shake. Ethan's threats weren't hollow, they were too calculated, too confident. It wasn't just arrogance, it was certainty. He was hiding something bigger, and I needed to know what. The next morning, I called Curtis, my private investigator. We're not done, I told him. Dig deeper into Ethan. Offshore accounts, business partners, anything unusual. Curtis didn't ask questions. By the end of the day, he had a lead. You were right, there's more to this guy, he said over the phone. Ethan's been funneling money into a series of shell companies, but here's the kicker, one of them is tied to a property in Madrid. My stomach dropped. Madrid? Yeah, Curtis confirmed. A penthouse in your city. It's been under the radar, no flashy purchases, no public records linking it directly to him. But here's the weird part, the payments for the property didn't come from Ethan's accounts. They came from an account under Rachel's name. I gripped the phone tighter. Rachel's been funding a penthouse in Madrid? Looks that way, Curtis said. But there's more. The account linked to those payments. It's been active for years, making regular withdrawals and transactions. It's like she's been living a double life. The words hit me like a freight train. Rachel hadn't just disappeared, she'd been playing me all along. Send me everything you've got, I said, my voice cold. An hour later, I sat in my hotel room, staring at the documents Curtis had sent. The penthouse was lavish, hidden away in one of Madrid's most exclusive neighborhoods. Payments had started shortly after Rachel vanished, and the transactions continued like clockwork. But it wasn't just the penthouse. The account activity showed shopping sprees, expensive dinners, and luxury trips, all under Rachel's name. And then there were the messages, encrypted emails between Rachel and someone listed only as M. My blood ran cold. Who the hell was M? And why had Rachel been communicating with them for years behind Ethan's back? I didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear, Rachel's betrayal ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. She hadn't just left me for Ethan, she'd built an entirely new life, right under my nose. Fueled by equal parts rage and curiosity, I booked a flight back to Madrid. I wasn't done with Rachel. Not by a long shot. I landed in Madrid with one mission, to uncover the truth Rachel had been hiding. It was no longer about her or Ethan, it was about me, about finding out just how deep her lies had gone and why she had orchestrated such a tangled web. The penthouse was as opulent as Curtis described, tucked away in a gated community that screamed exclusivity. I had no trouble gaining access, money talks, even when you're uninvited. When the door opened, Rachel stood there, stunned. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair tied back casually. For a moment, she looked just like the woman I'd married, before everything fell apart. Matteo, she said, her voice shaky. What are you doing here? I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, my eyes scanning the luxurious interior. The place was pristine, filled with expensive furniture and art that screamed money. But it wasn't Ethan's style. No, this was Rachel's. I could ask you the same thing, I said coldly. Care to explain how you've been funding a secret penthouse in Madrid while I thought you were struggling to escape Ethan's grasp? Her face paled. How did you? Don't even bother, I snapped, cutting her off. I know everything, Rachel. The accounts, the transactions, the emails. You've been living a double life, and I want answers. Now. She sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. It's not what you think. It never is with you, is it? I shot back. So let's hear it. Who's M? And don't even think about lying. Her eyes darted to the floor, and for a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. Then she let out a long sigh and said, M is Michael. Michael? I repeated, stunned. Who the hell is Michael? She hesitated, then said, he's someone I met after Ethan. Someone who helped me when things got complicated. Complicated, I muttered, shaking my head. You keep using that word like it justifies everything. Who is he, Rachel? Another billionaire? Another man who saw the real you? No, she said, her voice sharp. Michael isn't like Ethan. He's an investor. We started working together a few years ago. The penthouse was his idea, a place where I could be safe if things ever went south. And you didn't think to mention this to me? I said, my voice rising. You let me believe you were a victim, trapped in Ethan's world, and the whole time, you had a backup plan. A luxury backup plan, funded by some mystery man. It wasn't like that, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to tell you, Matteo. You don't understand what it's been like, trying to survive, trying to stay one step ahead. Don't you dare play the victim, I snapped. You've been lying to everyone, me, Ethan, probably Michael too. So tell me, Rachel, what's the real game here? What do you want? Money? Freedom? Power? She stood up, her eyes flashing with anger. I want a life, Matteo. A life that isn't dictated by you or Ethan or anyone else. Is that so hard to understand? I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of fury and heartbreak. You had a life with me, I said quietly. And you threw it away. Her expression softened, but I didn't let her speak. I don't know who you are anymore, I said. But I'm done chasing the ghost of the woman I thought I married. If you want out of this mess, Rachel, you can handle it yourself. I'm done. I turned and walked out the door, leaving her standing there in silence. But as I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Curtis. You were right. Ethan's been digging into Rachel too. Looks like he knows about Michael, and he's not happy. My stomach churned. This wasn't over yet. As I stared at Curtis's message, a knot tightened in my chest. Ethan was digging into Rachel. That could only mean one thing, he was planning his next move. And if there was one thing I'd learned about Ethan, it was that he didn't lose without taking someone down with him. I called Curtis immediately. What else do you know? Not much yet, he said. But Ethan's been moving quickly. He's pulling favors with some powerful people, Matteo. If he's targeting Rachel or this Michael guy, it won't end well. I swore under my breath. As much as I wanted to wash my hands of Rachel's mess, something kept pulling me back in. Maybe it was my pride, or maybe it was the fact that Ethan had made this personal. Either way, I wasn't about to let him win. I called Rachel. She picked up after the first ring, her voice tense. What now? Ethan knows about Michael, I said bluntly. Her sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. How? That's not important, I said. What matters is that he's coming after you. If you think he's just going to let you walk away, you're fooling yourself. There was a long pause, then Rachel said, I need to talk to Michael. Fine, I said. But if you think he can protect you from Ethan, you're wrong. You need a plan, Rachel. A real one. I'll figure it out, she said, but her voice wavered. Don't wait too long, I warned. Ethan's not the kind of man you can outsmart forever. I hung up and immediately started strategizing. If Ethan was making moves, I needed to stay ahead of him. I called Curtis again. I want eyes on Ethan, Michael, and Rachel. I don't care what it costs. I want to know everything they're doing. On it, Curtis said. What followed was a whirlwind of revelations I wasn't prepared for. Within 48 hours, Curtis had uncovered enough to make my head spin. Michael wasn't just an investor, he was a con artist, running his own schemes behind the scenes. And Rachel? She wasn't just his victim or partner. She was actively helping him siphon money from Ethan's empire. She's been playing both sides, Curtis said. Helping Michael steal from Ethan while pretending to be trapped in Ethan's world. It's a dangerous game, Mateo. If Ethan figures this out, she's done for. My hands tightened around my phone as I processed the information. Rachel hadn't just lied to me, she dragged me into a web of deceit so convoluted I could barely see the edges. I decided it was time for a final showdown. I arranged a meeting with Ethan, using the leverage I still held over him. We met in a private lounge, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. What do you want this time, Mateo? Ethan asked, his tone cold. I want this to end, I said. You leave Rachel alone, and she'll leave you alone. Whatever she took from you, write it off. It's not worth the bloodbath this is turning into. Ethan smirked. You really think she's worth protecting? She's playing everyone, Mateo. Me, you, Michael. She's out for herself, and she'll stab you in the back the second you're no longer useful. Maybe, I said. But that doesn't change the fact that you can't touch her without implicating yourself. So let's end this now before it gets worse for all of us. Ethan stared at me for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair. Fine, he said finally. But know this, she'll burn you too. It's only a matter of time. I left that meeting with a strange sense of closure. Ethan wasn't backing down out of fear, he was biding his time, waiting for his moment. And Rachel? She was a ticking time bomb, destined to implode eventually. For the first time in 8 years, I felt free. Free from Rachel's lies, free from Ethan's games, free from the tangled mess I'd spent so long trying to unravel. The last message I sent Rachel was simple. I'm done. Whatever happens next is on you. And with that, I walked away, finally ready to rebuild the life she had tried so hard to destroy. Epilogue, Lessons from the Storm. Looking back, I realize I learned more from Rachel's betrayal than I ever did from our marriage. Trust is fragile, and once it's broken, there's no going back. People will show you who they really are when their backs are against the wall. Believe them. My advice to anyone in a similar situation: don't chase ghosts. Don't waste your life trying to fix people who don't want to be fixed. Walk away, even if it hurts. Sometimes, freedom comes not from winning the game, but from refusing to play. For me, that was the real victory.